Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for rejoining us. We are starting a little bit late, so those of you who are online on time, thank you for your patience. Lunch took a little bit longer than we had hoped. Our next session is one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most, how to make economics a force for justice. And in this day and age, we are going to be trying something very new. You are all here, and our panelists are video calling in. So we're going to be watching three panelists zoom in from different parts of the world, one from Canada, one from the US, one from Brisbane. So I'm going to do their introductions from the stage, and then I'm going to sit amongst you in the seats. I'll ask the questions from there, but we'll be watching our panelists live on the big screen. So I just wanted to check with our tech team that everything's good to go. I can begin with the introductions now. Very good. Okay. Our first panelist, who I'm very excited to be introducing to you, is Dr. Robert Costanza. Dr. Robert Costanza is a professor of ecological economics and Vice Chancellor's Chair in Public Policy at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. He is also currently a Senior Research Fellow at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, an Affiliate Fellow at the Gund Institute for Environment, a Ditao Master of Ecological Economics at the Ditao Masters Academy, China, a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia and the Royal Society of Arts UK, and an Ambassador of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. Professor Costanza's transdisciplinary research integrates the study of humans and the rest of nature to address research, policy, and management issues at multiple time and space scales. From small watersheds to the global system, his areas of expertise include ecological economics, ecosystem services, landscape ecology, integrated ecological and socio-economic modeling, energy and material flow analysis, environmental policy, social traps and addictions, incentive structures and institutions. Our next panelist, who I met a very long time ago at a conference that I curated maybe 15 years ago, who is now back in the US, is Dr. Donnie McClurkin. Donnie McClurkin is a PhD affiliate professor of economics at Southern Oregon University, and executive director of the Post-Growth Institute, an international organization exploring how we thrive within ecological limits. Believing purpose-driven enterprise is at the heart of a healthy market economy, he has consulted over 500 not-for-profits and businesses across 32 different countries, with time based in Egypt, South Korea, Kenya, Thailand, Fiji, the US, and Australia. His own collaborative initiatives include developing the Office and Needs Market, Free Money Day, the Ashland Bike Brigade, the Post-Growth Fellowship, the Post-Growth Alliance, and Not-for-Profit Way training. A fellow of the Royal Society for the Arts, Donnie holds the Guinness World Record for the fastest journey on foot across Australia, and he's working on his fourth book, How on Earth Our Future is Not for Profit. And our third panelist, Sabrina Chakori, founder of the Brisbane Tool Library and associate lecturer at the University of Queensland. Sabrina holds a Bachelor in Biology, University of Geneva, and a Master's in Environmental Economics from the University of Queensland. And she is currently finishing a PhD that explores food packaging reduction in food systems within a degrowth economy. She is an associate lecturer at the University of Queensland, coordinating a course that focuses on the use of e-tech for ecological and social well-being in food systems. For more than a decade, Sabrina has been advocating for a more sustainable society, leading numerous collaborations in various countries across Europe, Kenya, Ecuador, Mexico, and Australia, including an initiative with Queensland's Environment Minister to introduce the law banning single-use plastic bags. Sabrina is convinced that to solve the interlinked social and ecological problems, we need to change the roots of our economy, shifting away from the growth-driven system. Full stop, sorry. To translate into practice her knowledge and vision, in 2017, she founded the Brisbane Tool Library. Could you please give a warm Newkind welcome to all three of our panelists? Can we have them up on the screen? Okay, let's do a sound check for all three. Hey, there you are. You can hear us? Yeah. See if we can hear them.
Are we trying the microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yours works, Sabrina. Let's check Bob's and Donnie's now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Donnie. Good to see your faces. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. We've had a brief email conversation. You are all such incredibly busy human beings, so you've had some moments to peruse the questions. But as you know, I wanted to begin with each of your vision for what a just economy or a just society would look like if we were to be able to build a society built on just economic principles. What is your vision of that just society? We can start with, let's go with Dr. Costanza.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it starts with changing our goals. And I think our goals need to shift away from GDP growth at all costs to a sustainable well-being of humans and the rest of nature and all humans. So I think we have to recognize that we're in a whole new geologic epoch, the Anthropocene, where our interactions with the rest of nature are changing that system in ways that were never possible historically. So we have to recognize and approach this as a whole systems problem. So we can't address economic justice without addressing ecological sustainability, without addressing how we manage our production and consumption. So I think going forward, we have to look at the whole system. This is difficult given the way academic institutions are set up. Everything is built in silos. And so creating this more transdisciplinary, more whole systems approach at all levels, I think is not an easy task, but I think that's the way it has to go. I think we need to have a system that really considers how this interconnected system functions, and also what we're trying to achieve with it. So I think the key task, really, I think we are addicted really to the current regime, if you will, and to break out of that addiction is going to require some intense therapy. And the best kind of therapy, or at least the first step in effective therapy, is to build a shared vision of the kind of world that we want, kind of life that we want for everyone. And I think the majority of people in the world would probably agree with a vision that is sustainable, is environmentally sustainable, is socially fair, that distributes wealth and resources equitably among the current generation of humans, but also between the current and future generations, and between humans and other species, and that allocates resources, effectively and efficiently, including all of the resources that affect our ongoing well-being. So it's a complex story, but I think we have to recognize the world is complex. There are no simple solutions. It's going to take a much more comprehensive systems approach in order to get there. But I think if you put that vision before people, they'll get excited about it. They'll say and we've done some survey work to show that, that's the kind of world that most people want to live in. What hasn't happened, I think, is a broad coalition of all of the forces, all the different elements that are all headed in that direction, coming together. There's a group that I've been involved with. You mentioned the Wellbeing Economy Alliance that's trying to do just that. How do we bring all of these different elements together, create a united front in order to show that there is a better way, and to get people to recognize that there is a better way. I don't think that's widely known. People sort of think, and they become somewhat fatalistic. That things seem to be going in the wrong direction. But there is a better way, and the only way to achieve that vision is to actually create it. We can't predict the future, but we can create it.
Thank you. Sabrina, can I throw to you now as to your vision of a just economy and what that might look like for us?
Sure. It's really hard to add to that, and at the same time, it's refreshing, to feel and see. And obviously, I'm familiar with Bob Costanza's work, but it's refreshing to see that, you know, these values are shared amongst maybe a minority, or maybe they're not outlined in the mainstream system as much, but they are common values. Yeah, I think that something that, you know, to echo what Bob just said, I think that the first thing that we have to accept and acknowledge is how can we have a society and economy that work within the ecological limits, and that is not whatever we put in that, you know, mechanism of how we want to achieve that is the work that requires the attention. I agree as well with the fact that we are called upon reimagining a society that goes beyond private monetary accumulation, beyond profit accumulation, which requires us to be courageous in the sense of thinking, how can human flourishing, you know, go beyond productivism, consumerism? Practical terms, when we wake up, you know, in the morning, what do we wake up for? Which kind of society do we want to contribute to? And that, you know, has it can be tackled from different perspectives, and obviously measuring what matters, and I'm sure that we might touch on that, you know, measuring the well-being, the social and ecological well-being is a first step, but is also, I think, the most important part of the work that needs. And for example, I'm born in '92, so I am that generation that already inherited this sick planet. And I think that even the absurdity of having a society that is based on productivism and, you know, consumerism rather than free time, you know, and what if we would free up time for people? What can people build from that? And yeah, and then again also.
Just lost you. 1, 2. Just lost you there, Sabrina. Your feed's just cut. So while that sorts itself out, we still can't see you or hear. I'm going to throw to Donnie now. Sorry, it just cut out. Your feed just cut, Sabrina. You there? Oh, we can't hear you now.
I'm here.
Okay.
I think Bob's mic might still be on.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
There we go. Sorry, I'll let you finish, Sabrina. We lost you for the last minute.
Oh, that's okay. I was just I'm sure that we will explore all of these in details, but yeah, I was just talking about the pre-distribution and equitable access to resources so that we can give dignity and you know, a certain level of life to most of people and not a minority.
Thank you, Sabrina. Donnie, your session that's following this discussion panel is titled "The More Beautiful World Your Heart Knows and Desires." So I'd love to hear your vision of what an economically just society might look like.
Thanks, Irfan. Hi, everyone. I sense that in our bodies, we actually all have a similar answer on that, a little like Bob and Sabrina were saying, that we've noticed times in our lives where we get glimpses of that future that we're seeking, and that the common denominating factor in those times is that there's a circulation of money, a circulation of power, a circulation of resources, that there's a sharing that is happening, whether it's in a family dynamic, whether it's in a business or an organization, whether it's in a society, whether it's along the lines of racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice. Living systems thrive on circulation, and they thrive and they die when there's accumulation. So I sense that we know this inherently in our bodies. We know this, we feel this, we understand this, and that a future that works is one in which circulation is inherent, particularly circulation of money. And such a future, therefore, has to be post-capitalist. It has to be post-colonial. It has to have worked through the challenges of accumulation that Sabrina was talking about. And it has to have circulation built into it in a way that replicates how nature does it, or how our bodies circulate blood and oxygen, or nitrogen is circulated throughout the environment. With that kind of circulation, which we have aspects of this already in our existing economy, when that becomes central, when power, resources, and money are shared and circulate in ways that are dynamic, then I think we'll be in a future that's truly sustainable.
Beautiful. Thank you, Donny. I think that's, I mean, we did have questions lined up, but this raised another question for me that I'm going to throw to Dr. Costanza. Maybe if you could for a moment to explain for us just briefly this difference between ecological economics and mainstream economics, because I think for a lot of us, when we hear ecological economics, oftentimes people think of environmental economics, and they might not understand quite what you're talking about. So if you could just give us a crash course in a couple of minutes of what it all actually means. Because I think Donny's point on circulation kind of leads well into that.
I think there's a fairly simple explanation there. Environmental economics is a subdiscipline of economics. Ecological economics is intended to be at least a transdisciplinary integration across ecology, economics, and all the other disciplines that are necessary to understand, our complex world. It's hard coming up with a term that encompasses all of that. We chose ecological economics because economics need to take a more ecological approach, and it's to think of the economy as a living system and embedded in society, embedded in the rest of the natural world, and also to recognize that humans are not unnatural. We're part of nature, and so you can't think of these three all of these components as independent pieces, and yet that's the way we had been addressing them. It's not that environmental economics doesn't contribute some valuable things, as does conventional ecology. I think it's not an either or kind of approach either. It's not saying environmental economics is this and ecological economics is that, completely separate. I think that's actually counter to what ecological economics is trying to be, which is to embrace the things that work and to recognize that all models are wrong. But some models are useful. And so how do we actually create useful models that can address the problems that we face now? And I think a lot of the conventional economic approach is based on problems that we faced, when the world was not in the Anthropocene, when it was relatively empty, or in the post-World War II period when, production and consumption were really the limiting factor. So we have to recognize that the world has changed, and that the models that maybe were successful and useful in the past are no longer useful. We need to build new and better models that recognize our current situation. I could keep going on what ecological economics is if you want me to, but I think I have a talk. I have a talk later.
Yeah, exactly. But you've created a nice segue for us, talking about things that do work and things that don't work. I think that's a nice little segue into the next question, which was, in order for us to have a really true deep conversation on economic justice, perhaps we should reflect on a little bit on economic injustice or inequality. And the question I have to the panel is, what are some of the mechanisms or functions within our current mainstream economic construct that do facilitate this accumulation of wealth and eventually inequity? So that we can actually understand, pick apart the parts of the system we're talking about that are facilitating inequality in society. So I'll leave it to the panel to decide who'd like to go first on that. Please. Yes.
I can. Well, I just went, so why don't we pick someone else? Donnie, you go.
Tag, you're it.
Over to you, Sabrina.
All right. Well, maybe I will just start with one part and then I'll let the other complete. I think that one setting that is enabling currently see is the fact that the way we measure, the current economic success or priority or prosperity doesn't even include the externalities. So, for example, the fact that we produce our products in global South countries, we don't question that anymore, like why are we producing in other countries? And obviously the explanation is that in that way we can keep growing our economy by exploiting the natural environment elsewhere, by exploiting labor elsewhere, capital accumulation and growth. So I think that the exploitation of capitalism is evident. It has been proven, it has been studied at least since the 70s, and model shows that unfortunately we are still on track of continuing that exploitation. But obviously that exploitation affects certain parts of the world more than others, certain parts of society more than others. And that actually is a really important point to acknowledge that injustice exists within the current system, because too often we hear, and I'm the first one that since I'm, since I was younger, I keep hearing, we need to tackle climate change for the future generation. And it's a very misleading political discourse that almost lead us to think that the problem is going to be in the future, or almost to postpone the effects of the failure of the current system. That we should reclaim back the fact that those effects in terms of, climate disruption are happening now. If we look at Madagascar, if we look at many other countries, that they're suffering from drought and other effects, ecological effects. And I like this idea of, relating, if we look at the data, consumption per capita obviously is, we as Western countries are driving that in terms resource exploitation. And I like to think, and I think we need to discuss more the fact that we are living in a climate apartheid, or as Jason Hickel says, it is like we are, colonizing the atmosphere. We are perpetuating this north and south imbalance, this rich-poor imbalance, just to at the end benefit the minority at the top for capital accumulation. So I think that if we start talking about climate apartheid, then we can understand the social and environmental injustice within the current growth-driven system.
Thank you, Sabrina. Maybe Donnie, and then we'll go back to Dr. Costanzo.
Yeah, I really love this question about some of the core pieces underpinning injustice. And I don't know if anyone's seen that graphic of where there's someone getting out of bed saying, I woke up on the wrong side of capitalism. I live in the US in a somewhat affluent town here, small town, and the amount of homelessness, the amount of people living in their cars right now is just off the charts. The amount of people under debt stress is so shocking. The statistic I heard the other day that really, really got to me was, you may have heard that 70% of people in the US, this bastion of capitalist enterprise, and that 70% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. But here's the piece that I wasn't expecting. 40% of people who have a household earning over $100,000, which is a considerable amount here in the US. 40% of households with $100,000 income are living paycheck to paycheck. That's interesting to me. It's shocking and interesting, and not shocking at the same time, because my short answer to your question, Irfan, is capitalism. There is no just form of capitalism. None. It doesn't exist. It's not possible. And one of the reasons that I notice a lot of people get confused around capitalism, including in the ecological sphere, is because there's often a confusion between value creation, which is unlimited. If we all joined forces and wanted to work together on a project, we could create unlimited value in a sense, and depending on how we value things, we could put prices on things that say that certain things were of certain value. All right. So there's what's called a non-zero sum equation with respect to value creation. So you have like an entrepreneur in the room and you're trying to talk to them about ecological limits and saying you can't keep growing on a finite planet. And they're often stuck in this conversation in a different framing, which is through capitalism, we can create all sorts of value and jobs and all sorts of things. And that just doesn't match up And so environmentalists and or social justice campaigners who are talking about inequities and problems of accumulation are often getting stuck in a different conversation because the heads of industry are saying, look, capitalism can save us. You know, we just need to reform it, perhaps we need to reimagine it, etc., etc. But the inherent problem in capitalism, one of the many, but one of the central inherent problems, is that capital accumulation, the very underpinning of the system whereby the reason you would invest in a company, the reason you would start a for-profit company, is in order to get a return on your investment that is larger than inflation. And the capital accumulation that happens then, the monetary accumulation in particular, right? In other words, where your bank balances actually increase over time, the bank balances of the billionaires in the world, the multimillionaires, etc., or the biggest corporations, when those bank balances increase, because of the way that money is created in our system, whereby it is lent into existence, and that takes a bit of unpacking that we probably don't have time for today, what happens is that all money has to be matched by an equivalent of debt somewhere in the system. And the reality is there's about 2.6 times the amount of debt in our global system as there is money. The point here is that in a capitalist system, money always accumulates faster than it circulates. And if it didn't, it wouldn't be capitalism. If the amount of taxation or wages or things that funnel money back into the real economy was stronger than the accumulatory power, it wouldn't be capitalism, right? No one would invest. No one would start a business if they couldn't accumulate capital through a process of enterprise. So when the money accumulates in the system, the debt has to accumulate elsewhere, and it accumulates in households, governments, and corporations. And that, folks, is the reason that under any capitalist system, you always get aggregate debt increases. And it doesn't matter how fast your GDP grows, the amount of stress that gets hidden in a capitalist system by the growth figure, you know, GDP is now rebounding, or we're seeing, you know, return to growth in China, etc., or millions and billions of people around the world get pulled out of poverty, so to speak. What gets missed in all of those conversations is, let's have a look at the debt graphs. What's actually happening in terms of the hidden stresses and often not hidden stresses? So the injustices that, as Sabrina said, are built into the colonization process on which capitalism has, for small portions of the world, benefited small portions of individuals and privilege certain populations over others. The accumulation comes at the expense of the debt accumulation that puts so many of us, so many other people under stress, and actually leads to rising house prices and downward pressure on wages. There's no way in a capitalist system to get out of that dilemma. And that's at the core, in my opinion, of so much of the injustice in the world, is that you're starting from a system that is fundamentally broken and in no way, shape or form, as capitalism, could ever address status inequities, could ever address class inequities, could ever address racial inequities writ large, because injustice is built into the very formula of the capitalist equation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's so much that we could lead on from that response, but I'll go to Dr. Costanza now for your response. So what are the key mechanisms in our current system that perpetuate inequity?
Well, I think it's not dissimilar from what Donnie was saying. I think the basic problem is the vision, you know, of the capitalist, or whatever you want to call it, system. You know, that about what the economy is and what the economy is for. You know, if you think that the economy is really the market and that's it, and if you think that the purpose of the economy is to maximize, you know, production and consumption and grow GDP, then that's never going to achieve the goals that we're talking about of having a sustainable well-being system. You know, it's going to be too focused on GDP growth, you know, at all costs. Really, it ignores all of the negative side effects of that GDP growth. It distributes property rights in a way that tries to maximize that growth, but that distribution of property rights does not maximize the well-being of the whole population. It leads to increasing inequality. That inequality leads to the destruction of social capital. That leads to the loss of well-being, really, in the general population. It's structured around a hierarchical view of the system. We're all individuals in competition with each other, for status and for money, and that's never going to lead to a system that's really more egalitarian. That's about the well-being of everyone. So I think the fundamental change has to be the vision of what the economy is and what it's for. And if we can make that change, and there are a few interesting examples around the world, like Bhutan, who's not pursuing GDP, they're pursuing gross national happiness, basically a way of saying the well-being of the population. There's the well-being economy governments, led by Scotland and New Zealand and Finland, which I think are starting to move more in that direction, at least making that shift away from what the economy is for is not growth of GDP, which has all of these negative side effects, but actually the pursuit of sustainable well-being, including all of the things that contribute to that. And we know from the psychological research recently about in positive psychology that consumption and production, are important. We do have to have food and a place to live, but they're a relatively small contributor to people's sense of life satisfaction and overall flourishing and well-being, and that these other things contribute in much more significant ways, particularly the social aspects. That's what actually makes people happy in the long run. And we are going to need some therapy, as I said. So continuing to point out these problems doesn't necessarily elicit change in the system. How do we make this transformation? It may take a collapse and rebuild, but I think there are other ways that might involve a more therapeutic approach. And I think that has to be based on building the shared vision and making that transition in a more gradual way. There are some cultures, I think, that have better words for what we're trying to achieve. In Sweden, they have a word, lagom, which means basically everyone has enough. So it's not about sacrifice. It's about, but it's also not about overconsumption. It's saying what our goal for the economy really is for everyone to have a sufficient level of production and consumption, but also to make sure that it's equitably distributed and make sure that it's not hurting, the systems that we rely on. So we probably need some new terms. There's donut economics. There's the circular bioeconomy. There's ecological economics. But I think well-being, the well-being economy, to focus really more on well-being at all scales, from individual well-being to community well-being to, national to planetary well-being. And health, I think, is a related term and concept. How do we build a healthy well-being system? Once you've changed that fundamental goal, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about can fall into place. But like Donnie was saying, right now we're having conversations that are completely missing each other because a lot of people are talking from the perspective of a completely different vision and goal of what the economy is and what it's about. And we say we want to do these things, which are going to help this goal, but they're talking about a completely different goal. So,
thank you. There was so much to unpack there, but I appreciate the point you highlighted, Donnie, as well, about there was so much talk about fixing, adjusting through policy or whatever the current system, as if we could quote unquote save capitalism. But you touched on the idea that literally the adjustments required to capitalism to make it sustainable would thereby deem it not capitalism. So could you just speak a little bit about that, because that I think touches on a point that causes a lot of confusion for a lot of people. So I think I'll jump to that before we continue on with what we could do to create economic justice. We'll just clarify that point and then we'll go to the next question.
Sure. In capitalism, the fundamental principle is that through private individual equity, you can get a return on your investment. That essentially the focus of the system is to profit maximize. And as Bob was saying, at all costs, right? And so even in a system where you're saying, oh, let's have companies more with a purpose, let's have socially responsible companies, let's have, you know, and I am a big fan of the shifts that are happening in terms of the move towards B Corps and things like that, but let's have more B Corps, let's have organizations that have a purpose at their heart. If those businesses are still making private individual shareholders richer, then the mathematical equation is that debt has to be expanding somewhere in the system while those people are accumulating more money. Because if you think about it, like let's say I make $1 million through my super fund, and then that super fund is reinvesting that in other companies. It's doing that in order to make me another, make more money. So for such a system to stop this debt expansion with capital accumulation, you would have to see profits going over to individuals and then circulating back at exactly the same rate, which would mean a taxation rate of close to 100%, or that everyone would need to be as philanthropic as they are, the amount of money they've got coming in. I mean, it's no longer capitalism, right? Like that's the very thing. Capitalism is based on capital accumulation, and capital accumulation is problematic across culture. It's problematic across the environment. It's a linear model in a system that cannot handle linear accumulation, and all societies that have historically focused on linear accumulation have collapsed. And it's indigenous cultures in particular that haven't, because they have an inbuilt circulation in their approaches. And that maybe opens up some other avenues for conversation.
Yeah, totally. I've got the next question I was going to throw to Sabrina, but Rob, look, Costanza, your hand just went up immediately. So was there something you wanted to add to Donnie's point there?
Yeah, just quickly, I think a part of that problem is fractional reserve banking. Where private banks, are the ones who are creating most of the money supply, and part of that, the reason for doing that is to, they're sort of locked into this idea that they have to get those loans repaid, and that sort of builds growth into the system. So one way to solve that is to eliminate fractional reserve banking. The banks would only loan money that they actually have, rather than creating the debt themselves. And that means taking control of the money supply back from the private sector and putting it back into the public sector. So people should own, as a community asset, the money supply. And I think there are a lot of other issues around property rights that could be revised there too, because now the current economic approach is, well, everything should be private, because that allows accumulation of wealth. But that's not really sustainable, and we have to recognize that many of our assets are really not inherently private goods. The atmosphere, ecosystems, our social structures. A lot of our assets that contribute to our well-being really are community property and should be managed as community property, and that takes it outside the sphere of the sort of capitalist approach, or at least that definition of the capitalist approach. So it's not that we can't have markets. It's not that we can't have private ownership of certain resources, but we have to get the balance right between private ownership, community ownership, and state ownership and regulation. With this sort of polycentric governance approach as well. And I think it is certainly possible. But on to you, Sabrina.
Thank you. Sabrina, yeah, so the next question, Sabrina, was thinking about a just system. What would be elements that we could begin, as I said earlier, whether it's things that are theoretical and not yet created, or things that are literally being practically applied around the world? What are some elements or functions, mechanisms within a just economic construct, in your opinion?
Yeah, obviously, as we said, changing the purpose, the fundamental value why of our existence and the existence of our society would be the beginning. But I think that we were talking back just 1 second to the injustices. We have a system where unemployment exists as well as the working poor class. So this system is obviously not working anymore towards creating well-being. And I think that some important conversation that needs to be raised are like the importance of, for example, available time. We still measure the prosperity of a nation on how much productive we are instead of how much free time people have. So, and I feel that maybe shifting that conversation from a pure monetary perspective to free time, that time that we don't have, and we know it as as activists, as academic, we are always time poor, struggling to bring innovation to society because we are ourselves victim of the system. And I think, for example, fighting for a society that provides more free time would allow that time to be an incubator for new imaginaries. But also we need to probably rethink private property, these bold things. And obviously, if we go into another event talking about private property, or how can we manage resources as commons, how can we make explicit the commons in a different ways, but also democracies themselves. Are we actually in a democracy in Australia or in many other countries? Is there any other agent of change? And I'm more and more redirecting my interest and my work towards communities as the agent of change, because we're being told that individual action going to change, by switching the light or recycling, we're going to change the system. But obviously, individual can't, tackle the burden of such a complex social and ecological degradation. But obviously, we probably won't have time, but there's also different monetary systems that could be in place. What if money had an expiry date? That would help that circulation that Donnie would say, because accumulating money would, end up costing more than circulating it. And these are all theories that, for example, money with an expiry date has been suggested by Sylvia Gesell already, 2 centuries ago. So I think we need to explore more these different ways of, really tackling the nucleus of our society, private property, time, labor for what? Labor for income, just to pay back those debts and those, that we have, or can we use that human creativity and productivity towards something else? So, and I think fundamentally we should shift from the idea on, of this artificial scarcity that capitalism make us think exists, to how can we live in abundance? How can we live as a collective, and how can we manage the society as a collective rather than for our own individual interest?
Thank you, Sabrina. That reminds me of something about, what was it, Berlin City Council recently, that repossessed or forcibly repossessed a bunch of apartment buildings and from the rich, who, and you mentioned that the imagined scarcity that capitalism really relies on. They actually repossessed a bunch of empty apartment blocks from investors and said, no, we're going to actually house the homeless. So, because leaving them empty was better for the investors than to actually sell them for cheaply. So that these kinds of little shifts in thinking as to, like, is it just to do that or not, are little things that are being implemented all over the world. It's not completely alien and unimaginable to us. So I think, yeah, that imagined scarcity is definitely one of the things we should begin addressing. Dr. Costanza, your hand's up, so I'll throw to you now.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, this idea of common asset trusts has been proposed as a way to actually implement this idea of community ownership of these kinds of natural capital, but it could also be social assets. We're working now with the country of Costa Rica to implement this idea at the national scale, and to say that all of the natural resources in Costa Rica should be considered as a common asset trust, recognizing that we all own these resources together, and it should be, and there is the legal principle of the public trust doctrine that's been applied in some cases, that I think sort of underlies that approach. There's also a lot of experiments with local currencies, which are sort of community-owned and run currency systems that do get past this this idea that the expiration date, or currencies that have an expiration date, that are really there to help motivate and facilitate the things that people want to do, rather than to accumulate capital for a select few.
Thank you. We might go over by a couple of minutes, but we'll try and stick to time. Donnie, if I can get your thoughts on this one, and then we'll go one more question, but very quickly.
I think there's an incredible story that hasn't really been told about the global economy. From the work we've done at the Post-Growth Institute, we found that almost 20% of global GDP comes from businesses without private individual owners. That's foundation-owned businesses, not-for-profit enterprises, consumer cooperatives, and government enterprises. That's a huge, huge proof of concept that you can have a market based on businesses that aren't without private individual ownership. And some of the world's most profitable businesses are not-for-profit, some of the world's biggest businesses, and some of the world's smallest businesses. And it's interesting to me, I know most of our audience here is based in Australia, my own home country. And what surprised me in the last year was to discover that the Business Council on Cooperatives and Mutuals announced that they had a win by getting business.gov, the Australian government's main business website, to acknowledge that mutual and cooperative businesses were forms of business, right? To actually acknowledge the role of these, and so the primary thing that I think of as a leverage point is, let's remind people that there are alternative forms of business that are successful. Let's see that. Let's go tell people who work in business faculties within universities to add that into their microeconomics pieces, into their MBA programs. Think about the businesses that you bank with, that you work with, that you engage with, and ask the question, do they circulate money inherently because they're without private individual owners? Are they fundamentally not for profit, or are they for profit? To me, that's an incredible opportunity to strengthen legislation around that, to strengthen incubator support for those forms of business, and to get to the root of this monetary accumulation piece. And then just a random other piece I'd put in as a suggestion is one that I often think about. What if we encourage our friends and ourselves and others to think about inheritance skipping a generation? It often strikes me that inheritance, in lots of Western societies in particular, comes at a time when when some people might have already moved through and be in a situation where there's a little less financial stress in some circumstances. I'm surprised that inheritance doesn't just skip a generation and then all of a sudden it's circulating through to those who are perhaps in greater need in terms of their life, the time of life that they're in.
Interesting, thank you. I'm aware we're getting close to the end, but I just wanted to say, people have got so many questions, I'm sure. You each have another hour-long workshop immediately after this. So perhaps if people have got questions you wanted to ask, is it possible to leave some Q&A time in your presentations so that people can ask you questions directly? So we have got, after this, we've got Dr. Robert Costanza, Overcoming Our Societal Addiction to Growth, in the lecture theatre on level 1. That's downstairs. We have Sabrina Chakori, The Need for Courageous Imaginaries, on level 7 in the conference room on level 7. That's the one on the right-hand side. We have Emergency Food Relief in Melbourne, which is an incredible story of resilience and support for the local Victorian community, from Stuart Muir Wilson, in room 1 on level 7. And Donnie's session, The More Beautiful World Your Heart Knows and Desires, is in room 2 of level 7. So do take your questions there, because I know you probably got lots of questions you wanted to ask, and we're running a bit short of time. We might go over by a couple of minutes with this final question, if we could each get like just a short response. We've kind of talked about whether it's going to be a transition or a collapse in different ways throughout today, and you've kind of touched on it yourselves. What are your opinions on this? Are we going to see a slow and gradual just transition, or do you feel perhaps it might be a collapse rebuild situation? What are your thoughts on that? Is there something in between those things? Whatever. I'll open it up to maybe Sabrina, if you want to kick us off with that one.
Sure. Well, it's a tricky one because really, if it's collapse, we can't avoid it. So really, like for me, the reason of waking up is to work towards that planned downscaling of the metabolism of the economy, and that's where sometimes the word degrowth or post-growth is mixed up with recession and austerity and stuff, but it's actually all the opposite. Planning for economic degrowth means planning to downscale the economy while prioritizing social and ecological well-being, and I think this is what we are called upon to do now, is having that plan set up. And just quickly, Donnie mentioned all these purpose-led businesses, and we have to refuse and push back also that greenwashing that comes from the mainstream, because sustainability that used to be an antagonist to economic growth now it has been greenwashed. And the one example is the Sustainable Development Goals. They have all these beautiful, valuable goals in them, and then economic growth is the SDG number 8. So obviously, if you pursue that SDG number 8, it means giving up on that. So I think just being attentive on pushing and refusing the current system while experimenting and offering an alternative at various levels and as much as we can.
I'll jump in. If you're working for gender justice, if you're working for racial justice, if you're working for ecological justice, you're working for social justice, you're all too familiar with gaslighting. When it comes to economics and capitalism and the climate, we're experiencing gaslighting. We know this system is unsustainable. So it's really just a question of how much dissonance people are walking around with, which explains a lot of the stress that we're going through. The reason I preface my response with this is because I was in Hungary recently and I was asked about this question around collapse. And I opted to give an unusual response. I said that at the Post-Growth Institute, we're seeking to plant the seeds for a future post-collapse, where we can turn and say it was capitalism that was the problem. It was the disconnection on so many levels with Mother Earth, et cetera, that is fundamentally the problem. And that collapse is inevitable. We're in it right now, and that the feedback loops are locked in my opinion. And what surprised me was this group of maybe 30 young people in the room visibly relaxed. Their shoulders relaxed. I just told them we're facing collapse, it's inevitable. And I can only put it down to the fact that it relieved the dissonance that they're feeling in their bodies. It stopped the gaslighting. It's not to say it stopped the hope. We're working to slow it down. We're working for a different future, but we're in collapse. So we do everything we can to create that future beyond.
Beautiful. Thank you, Donnie. Oh, a microphone that works. Dr. Stanza, I'll go to you for our final response.
Well, I think it's going to take a crisis to make this transformation. How big of a crisis, and when you call it a collapse, and when you call it simply a big crisis, I think is still an open question. And I think we would probably like to, have it be as small a crisis as possible, if it were actually possible to make that transition. But I don't think the system has collapsed yet. I think we're on the edge of, or on the verge of collapse, and we're experiencing crises of increasing magnitude. And historically, civilizations have routinely collapsed. And we can learn something from what caused those collapse and what might have been done differently. And I think in general, those historical collapses have occurred, not from any one cause, but from kind of a perfect storm of things coming together. And I think we're sort of in that situation now. I think the system is brittle. I think it's open to collapse. But I think the crises that we're continually experiencing in the last year has certainly given us plenty of them. Were any of them enough to sort of cause this sort of more gradual transition, I'm not sure, but I think it's still possible. And I think there are some very positive things going on. Like I said, the well-being economy governments. I think there's all of the kinds of things that we've been talking about are actually occurring somewhere on the planet at a smaller scale. They're just not all occurring, at the same time in the same place. So I think we have a lot of existence proofs that the kinds of things that we're thinking about are not infeasible. They're not pie in the sky dreaming. They're feasible things. They just have to be applied. And I think ultimately, if we want to avoid the collapse, and rebuilding after collapse, I think is not the preferable scenario. I think that's to be avoided if possible. It may still happen, but I'm hopeful that we can find another way and make this transition more gradual, and just using the crises in the system, to motivate the kind of change that we're all talking about.
Thank you. I think, I too prefer maybe the way Sabrina put it, the slowing down the metabolism of the economy. I think that might be a much better way of going than waiting for the collapse. Could we please give our panelists a warm round of applause? Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being here with us. Literal decades of experience, literal decades of expertise. Thank you so much for that. We'll realize that you are all obviously ready to go for your sessions, but it's going to take us 5 minutes to physically move ourselves to be in our room. So if you could give us 5 minutes, we'll begin your sessions in 5. Everyone, could you please make it to the different seminar rooms as quickly as you possibly can? Thank you so much once again. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.